Welcome, students, to the Introduction to Rhetoric and Rhetorical Analysis through the SOAPSTone method. Earlier, you watched a video which introduced you to the topic of rhetoric. Rhetoric began 2,500 years ago as the study of the forms of communication and argument essential to public, political, and legal life in ancient Greece. It has since evolved a rich and diverse body of research, texts, and pedagogies. Rhetoric. It studies the uses of written, spoken, and visual language. It investigates how language is used to persuade or convince another and to share knowledge. And it also provides essential tools for civic, professional, and academic life. Originally, Aristotle viewed the rhetorical triangle as this. It contained the elements of ethos, logos, and pathos. Ethos refers to the writer's ethical appeal or credibility. How well is the writer prepared to write on this particular topic? Can we believe him? Pathos refers to an argument's emotional appeals, which the writer intrudes via his use of certain words, his diction, and the structure of his sentences, which we call syntax. Logos corresponds with the argument's logical appeals. The writer has to present his argument in a progression that is logical to the reader and is easy for him to follow. The modern rhetorical triangle looks at it this way. We have the writer, the reader, and the text. The author presents us with a situation, and we, as the reader or audience, must believe him. In other words, the writer has to have credibility. The text is the means by which the writer presents his or her arguments, and the reader, the audience, must be able to interpret the text in order to follow the writer's thoughts, and to accept the argument. Now, in order to analyze the text, we're going to use the SOAPSTone method, and this different parts stand for speaker, occasion, audience, purpose, subject, and tone. Tone is not the mood, okay? That's in fiction but not in nonfiction. This is an acronym, and it provides us with a series of questions that we have to ask and then answer if we want to fully analyze the content of a text. First, we have the speaker. Please remember the speaker is not always a writer. Okay, the writer, for example, I'll give you Huckleberry Finn. In that novel by Mark Twain, Huckleberry Finn is the speaker, but the author is Mark Twain. So, the speaker uses a voice to tell the story. Now, I use the example of Huckleberry Finn, which is a fictional piece, but this also works in nonfiction pieces, which we examine in this course. The author chooses a persona or a mask to deliver the content. Still, this is all dependent on the writer's ethos or credibility. So the writer has to know the content which he or she is delivering. The occasion. Now, the occasion is the time and place of the piece. It's important for us to know this. If we are reading a piece which is written by an individual in Philadelphia in the 1700s, middle 1700s, we have to understand what is happening in that particular community at that time. The context is what prompted the content of the writer's piece. What's going on in Philadelphia in the mid-1700s? And finally, the environment of ideas, attitudes, and emotions that are swirling around this broader issue. That's the larger occasion. And we would presume, if this was Philadelphia in the mid-1700s, that we've got some political activism going on. There's also the immediate occasion, a particular situation or event that the writer has focused his attention on and then triggered the response he wants to get from his audience. Now, the audience, that's the group of readers to whom the piece is directed, or the listeners if it's a speech. This affects how and why the writer shapes the content. The writer wants to reach his audience, so he has to know to whom he is speaking through the content, or in the case of a speech, to whom he is speaking orally. Most audiences contain diverse members, which we could presume are men, women, sometimes children, sometimes different racial groups. We need to know to whom we are speaking. The purpose for which the content is prepared is also important. That's the intention or the aim that the writer hopes to achieve. We have to know the reason behind the text. This could be explicit, stated in the thesis, or it could be implied, implicit. And therefore we have to listen carefully, or if we're reading, read between the lines. The purpose is predetermined by the author. If we're writing a piece ourselves and we don't know why we're writing it, it's not going to go anywhere. The subject. Now this is the issue or the idea at hand. What topic is the writer using? This is revealed in the writer's content. And many times it's generated by current events or an agenda. Something has happened that sparked a response from the from the writer, and he wants to get the same response from his readers or his audience. The tone. Finally, the tone, again, is not the mood, but this is the way in which the author approaches his audience. It's his attitude toward them and toward the subject. If the audience needs some background information, the author may choose a didactic or educational tone. It's got to present some factual information, some background information, if you will. This goes beyond the literal words themselves, into the implications, the feeling that the author is getting across. This is conveyed in his word choices, in his sentence structure, and in the figurative language or rhetorical strategies that he uses. These could be metaphors, similes, comparisons of other sorts, etc. And thus, when we apply the SOAPSTone, we can begin to analyze all the parts of an author's content, written content, or a speaker's oral content. And this will affect the emotional response of the reader or the listener. And that concludes our program.